6 minutes before I was supposed to walk down a dock in my mother's veil. My phone buzzed against the dressing room mirror, and I already knew, before I picked it up, that it was going to be my brother's voice and not my father's. "Dad's staying in the truck," Desmond said. "No hello. He doesn't need to be part of this circus." I had a bobby pin between my teeth. I took it out slow. "He told me Tuesday he was walking me down." "Tuesday was before you humiliated this family, Ren." I want to tell you what I said back. "I will, in a minute. But first you should know how a 31-year-old paramedic who hadn't cried in front of another human in 16 months ended up standing alone in a dressing room with sand still on her shoes. Because by the end of this, my brother was the one standing outside a door he wasn't allowed through. Neither of us saw that coming. I almost wasn't the one who built that door. Stick around. Because the woman who let me in wasn't who you'd think. I work the overnight rig out of a township on the Maine coast small enough that the volunteer fire siren still doubles as the noon whistle. 16 months ago my father had a stroke on his own dock, face down in the rocks at low tide, and I was the one who got the call because I was always the one who got the call. My mother died when I was 19. Since then it had just been the three of us, me, Dad, and Desmond, who lived 2 hours south and visited on holidays and called that staying close. After the stroke, somebody had to learn the feeding schedule, the speech therapy homework, the 17-page Medicaid waiver application that gets rejected if you staple it wrong. That somebody was me. Desmond sent flowers to the rehab facility. I want you to sit with that detail for a second, because it matters later. I didn't resent it. That's the part people don't believe. I loved my father, and tending him felt like the most natural thing in the world, until the bill for it came due in a currency nobody warned me about. 3 weeks before my wedding. I was doing the thing I did every Sunday night, refilling Dad's pillbox, paying the slip fee on his boat before the marina charged a penalty, signing the home health aides timesheet because his hand still shook too badly to hold a pen straight. None of it was dramatic. The work that keeps a family upright never is. My phone buzzed. "Desmond. We should talk about the venue before you lock anything in." I read it twice. We'd locked the venue in 4 months ago. I should have heard that sentence for what it was. I didn't, not yet. The venue was Callaway Point, a half-acre of granite and sea grass where our grandfather had kept the local lighthouse running for 30 years before the state automated it. He proposed to our grandmother there. My father had wanted to marry my mother there and couldn't afford it, so he'd promised, out loud, at Christmas, in front of Desmond, that one of us would get married on that point someday. I was the one who'd kept the deed paperwork current after Grandpa died. I was the one who paid the property taxes on land that, technically, belonged to all three of us equally. Desmond showed up at my apartment that Thursday with his daughter Bertie in tow. 6 years old, sticky hands, and that particular warmth people bring when they're about to ask you for something. He needed $800 for Bertie's dental work. His insurance lapsed again. I wrote the check before he finished the sentence. I always did, and he tucked it into his jacket like it cost him something to take it. Then, rinsing a coffee mug at my sink like it was nothing, he said it. "Dad's not really up for a big crowd standing on rocks all day. You know how his balance is. Maybe you do something smaller. Somewhere safer." "The point isn't dangerous, Desmond. I've had Dad out there twice since the stroke." He smiled the way he used to right before he'd tattle on me as kids. "You always think you know what's best for him. Funny, since you're the one who put him in that facility." That sentence had teeth. He knew exactly where to bite. I'd spent 4 months fighting guilt over a decision a physical therapist had insisted on, and Desmond had just weaponized it in 9 words, in my own kitchen. While my niece colored at my table. He left with Bertie and my check and a look on his face I didn't understand yet. I would. In 9 days. I drove out to see Dad that same evening because waiting has never been a skill of mine. He was in his recliner at the facility, the TV on low, a crossword half-finished on the tray. "Hey, kiddo," he said, the words still coming slow and careful since the stroke, each one a small victory I'd helped him win back. "Dad. The wedding. You're still walking me out, right? On the point?" He looked at the crossword instead of me. "Desmond thinks it might be a lot. The rocks, the wind. Since when does Desmond decide what you can handle?" "He's been coming around more," Dad said, and something in his voice made my stomach drop. Careful, rehearsed, like he was reading lines someone had given him. "Says he wants to help more. With the trust. The point's in the trust, you know. All three of us." There it was. Not concern about rocks. Desmond wanted control of Grandpa's land, and a wedding moved off the point meant a precedent he could use later to argue it should just be sold. My boundary-pushing, caretaking, won't-shut-up presence on that property was the only thing standing between Desmond and a real estate decision he could make alone with a vulnerable, recovering man's signature. I drove home with the dome light off and my hands too tight on the wheel. 6 days later, the call came. Dad's number, but I could hear Desmond in the background, low and steady. feeding him words like a director feeding an actor lines. "Ren, honey, we think, it's best we keep the wedding off the point. Just to be safe." "Desmond thinks," I repeated. "Don't make this hard." I wasn't making anything. I was standing in my kitchen 9 days from my wedding, watching my own father give away the one piece of family ground that was supposed to be mine to stand on. Because handing it over was easier than holding a line against his son. I hung up before I could say something I couldn't take back. And then, and this is the part that still makes me wince, I picked the phone back up and refilled Dad's blood pressure prescription. Because the pharmacy app had pinged me, because 16 months of reflex doesn't switch off just because your heart got kicked. I was still propping up a house I'd just been locked out of. I'm not going to pretend I didn't think about fighting dirty. I did. I have a folder on my laptop, every receipt, every copay, every hour of unpaid care I'd logged for the family attorney, just in case. I pictured walking into Sunday dinner and reading it out loud. Watching Desmond's face when he understood exactly what his freedom had cost me, dollar for dollar. I had the receipts. I had the moral high ground. I had every reason to detonate it in front of the whole family. I didn't get the chance to decide on my own. Because 2 days later my father's home aide, Costa, called me, not Desmond, Costa, and said something that changed everything I thought I understood about who was actually scared in this story. "Your dad's been asking me to read him your old voicemails," Costa said. "The ones from after the stroke. He plays them at night. I thought you should know." I didn't understand why that mattered until I drove out that Saturday to grab Grandpa's old ship's log from the bottom of Dad's closet, research for vows. Of all things, and found Dad sitting alone in his room holding his phone, my own voice coming tinny out of the speaker. 16-month-old me, exhausted, saying "I'm on my way, Dad, just hang on, I'm almost there." He didn't hear me in the doorway. He just sat there playing it again. I backed out quiet and sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long time. He wasn't choosing Desmond because he trusted him more. He was choosing Desmond because some shamed, frightened part of him couldn't bear listening to proof of exactly how much I'd carried. It was easier to let the version of events where I was controlling win than to sit with the version where his daughter had been catching him in the dark for 16 months while his son sent flowers. That should have made me angrier. Instead, for the first time, I understood the shape of the trap instead of just feeling its teeth. Grandpa's ship's log was in a cedar box at the bottom of that closet. And when I opened it that night at my own kitchen table, a folded scrap of paper slid out from between the pages, his handwriting. The same cramped hand from 40 years of weather entries. Not addressed to anyone. Just left there. "A lighthouse doesn't go looking for the harbor. It stands, and the harbor finds it." I read it twice. Then I sat back in my chair and laughed, short, surprised. A little broken, because I'd spent 2 weeks trying to fight my way back onto a piece of land. And my grandfather had reached 40 years into the future to tell me I didn't need the land at all. I needed to stand somewhere, and let the right people find me there. I closed the laptop folder that night. Not deleted, closed. I wasn't going to need it. I had a better idea, and it had nothing to do with proving anything to Desmond. The next morning, Marisol Reyes called. I'd run her husband's cardiac arrest call 11 months earlier, got there in 6 minutes, kept his heart going until the bird could land. She was checking in, the way people do near an anniversary, and somewhere in the conversation I let slip, more than I meant to, that I'd lost my venue 9 days out. She went quiet. Then, Ren, our marina. The one Hector rebuilt the docks on after his surgery. It's just sitting there in October, and it's got the prettiest sunset view on this whole coast. Let us give you the wedding. Please. You gave us 11 extra months with him. Let us give you 1 day. I sat down on my front step and didn't say anything for a second, because this wasn't a stranger's kindness falling out of the sky. This was a harvest. 11 months of overnight calls and follow-up visits I never charged for, coming back around in the shape of a marina with string lights and a view of open water. I said yes. Then I started making calls, and the town did something I still don't fully have words for. It moved with me. The volunteer fire crew rigged the lighting. A family whose grandmother I'd sat with through her last hospice week brought every folding chair they owned. The diner that catered Dad's birthday every year for a decade sent chowder, no charge, for the girl who never billed us extra at 3 in the morning. 9 days. I want you to sit with that number, because what happened next happened in 9 days. And not one bit of it required Desmond's permission, Dad's apology, or a single number read off a spreadsheet. Desmond caught wind that I wasn't crumbling, and it did something to him. His whole plan had needed an ending where I stood on a dock alone, proof to the family that I'd finally pushed everyone away with my controlling nature. So he escalated, told our aunt I'd snubbed family land for strangers, told Bertie's mother I was burning bridges out of spite, dropped little wounded comments into every group text. He was shouting a story into a room that had already met the truth in person, one stretcher call at a time. And the room wasn't listening to him anymore. The night before the wedding, I did the quiet thing instead of the loud one. I logged into the family trust portal and formally removed myself as the managing trustee on Callaway Point, fully, permanently, the role I'd held since Grandpa died because nobody else would do the paperwork. I emailed Dad a packet, every account, every login, every appointment, labeled in plain language. The same way I'd write discharge instructions for a patient going home to manage a loan. One line on top: Dad, this is everything I've carried for you and the point. It's yours and Desmond's now. I love you. I'm not angry. I'm just done holding what nobody will admit needs holding. I hit send and felt something in my chest lower itself down, slow, like a thing finally allowed to stop bracing. My phone lit up 40 minutes later. Desmond's name. I let it ring out. Whatever he had to say could wait until tomorrow, when I'd be standing somewhere he had no say over at all. So that's where we left off, 6 minutes before the wedding. My brother's voice telling me Dad was staying in the truck. My hand still holding a bobby pin instead of my father's arm. Here's what he didn't know yet. I'd called the marina's harbor master the night before and asked one more favor. I walked out of that dressing room in my mother's veil, down a dock strung with lights, toward 100 faces that turned and didn't look away, paramedics I'd trained. The Reyes family front row with Hector standing despite his cardiologist's objections. The diner owner crying into a napkin before I'd even reached the aisle, and there, near the back, not in a truck at all, was my father. Out of his chair. Standing, with a cane, with Costa's hand hovering near his elbow just in case, but standing. He'd read the packet at 6 that morning, Costa told me later, every page. And somewhere around the pharmacy logs he'd started crying and hadn't entirely stopped since. Desmond was right behind him in the doorway. And when he saw the doc, full, glowing, nobody missing but him, his face did something I'll remember for the rest of my life. He'd built a story where I'd be standing alone. Instead he was the one standing at the edge of a room with no seat saved for him in it, because nobody in that crowd had been hearing his version of events. They'd been living the real one favor, one shift, one quiet act of care at a time, for years. This is ridiculous, he said, too loud, the way people get when they're losing. You think you can just buy a crowd, Ren? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need the folder. I'd left it closed for a reason. I didn't buy anybody, Desmond. I just finally stopped standing where you put me. The dock was quiet enough to hear the water under it. My father took one slow step forward on his cane, and when he reached me, he didn't say anything about the venue, or the trust, or 16 months of silence. He just took my arm, the way we'd practiced before the stroke ever happened, and said, voice cracking on every other word, I should have been the one calling you, kiddo. Not the other way around. I'm sorry it took me this long to stand up. We walked the rest of the dock together. Desmond didn't follow. He stood at the threshold a long moment, and then he turned around and left the way he'd come. And nobody chased after him, because for the first time in 16 months, nobody needed to. The weeks after told the rest of it quietly. Dad learned his own pillbox. Missed a refill once, caught it himself the second time. He calls now just to talk about the weather, or a Sox game, or my mother, not because he needs something fixed. Desmond hasn't called at all, and I've stopped waiting for him to. I still have Grandpa's note. It's tucked into the same cedar box, and some mornings before a shift I read it again. A lighthouse doesn't go looking for the harbor. It stands, and the harbor finds it. I spent 16 months thinking my place was wherever they decided to put me. Turns out my place was just wherever I planted my feet and stopped moving for someone else's convenience. The harbor found me anyway. It always does, for the people who stop looking for permission to stand still. If you've ever held a family together with both hands and gotten told to know your place for it,